Control structures, otherwise known as control flow statements, allow us to alter the flow of execution of programs. Basically, we have two types. We have the conditionals and we have the loops. Typically, programs execute from top to bottom in a linear manner. But with control structures, we can make our programs to be dynamic. The conditionals allows our programs to make decisions. And with the loops, we can be able to repeat the execution of programs or code as many times as we want. Now let's start with the conditionals. Here we have conditionals. And under the conditionals, we have the if statement, we'll have the else statement, and finally, we have the elif statement. Now let's start with the if statement. Here we have if statements. With the if statement, we can be able to execute statements or code when certain conditions are met. So this is how we use the if statement. First, you provide the if keyword followed by a condition. So we can have something like a condition, then a colon. Inside the if statement, we're going to provide the code or the statement that we want to execute if the condition is true. Now let me provide a more realistic example. Here I'm going to have num is equal to 5. I'm going to have if followed by a condition. Condition here refers to an expression that evaluates to a Boolean value or just a Boolean value. So we can have something like if num is greater than 1, then a colon. After the colon, we'll provide the statements or the code that we want to execute if the condition is true. Here I'm going to have print, I'm going to have number greater than 1. Now let me run this program. If I run this program, we're going to get number greater than 1. So look at what happens. This statement can only execute if this condition is true. If this condition is not true, this statement will not execute. So we have our if statement which contains a condition. This condition has to be true before the statement under it can execute. So these lines of code under the if statement or under control structures are called the code block. I can as well decide to have something like print done. Then run the program. You can see number greater than 1 and done. These two print statements are called code block. If you look very closely, you can see that there's an indentation after the colon, and the both statements have the same indentation level. If I increase the indentation of any of the statements, I'm going to run into a syntax error. So this is how it should be. Now, let me change this value to 0 and run the program. And as you can see, nothing happens. And the reason why it seems like nothing happened is because this condition evaluated to false. Number here is 0, which makes this expression to evaluate to false. And because this is false, these statements will not execute. And this brings us to the else statement. Here I'm going to have else, then a colon. After the colon, I'm going to provide the statement. So here I can have print number less than 1. Now let me run the program, and as you can see, we have number less than 1. So look at what happens. When we run this program, it is going to evaluate if this condition is true. If this condition is true, these statements are going to execute. But if the condition is false or not true, then The statements under the else clause are going to execute. The only way this statement can execute is if the condition here is not true. Now let's take a look at this example. Here I'm going to have age is equal to 12. And here I'm going to have if age is greater than or equal to 18, print adult. Now I'm going to have an else clause. For this else clause, I'm going to have print not adult. Now let me run the program. And as you can see, we have not adult. And the reason for this is because this expression evaluated to false because we have age as 12, which is not greater than or equal to 18. And as such, the statement under the else clause get to be executed, which is print not adult. Now I can change this to 20. And this time around, if I run the program, it is going to display adult. Now, another thing you have to pay attention to is the indentation level of the if statement and the else statement. If you look closely, you can see that they are the same level. So be sure to use a matching else clause with the same indentation level for the if statement. So this is how it works. Now let's look at another example. In this example, we're going to be using the if and the else statements to determine whether a number is an even number or an odd number. So here I'm going to have even or odd number. I'm going to start by having a number is equal to 4. Here I'm going to have if num, then I'll use a modulo operator, and 2 is equal to 0. We have print even. Then for the else, we're going to have print odd. Now let's run the program, and as you can see, we have even. If I change this to 5, we're going to get odd. Now, if you look at this expression, we have num modulo 2, which is equal to 0. In other words, we're trying to establish that number divided by 2, that is the remainder, if number is divided by 2, the remainder should be 0 for the number to be an even number. Of course, even numbers are numbers divisible by 2 without remainder. So if the remainder, if number is divided by 2 is equal to 0, it makes that number an even number. And as such, we have print even. But if the number is not perfectly divisible by 2, it means the number is an odd number. And as such, we're going to have print odd. Now, finally, let's take one more example. In this example, we're going to be using the if and the else statements to determine whether a number or whether a score is up to the pass mark. So we can have something like a pass mark. Here I'm going to have 50. Now I'm going to be using the input statement to fetch data from the terminal. So I'm going to have score is equal to input. Here I'm going to have please enter a score. And because I'm expecting a score, I'm expecting a numeric value, I'm going to be wrapping this input function inside of a float or an int. So let's wrap it inside a bracket or a parenthesis. Then here I'm going to have float. Next, I'm going to be providing the if statement. So I'm going to have if score is greater than or equal to pass mark. colon. Here I'm going to have print passed. Then else I'm going to have print failed. Now let's run this program, and I'm going to be running it from the terminal. So first I'm going to navigate to the folder containing the script. So we're going to have cd documents, cd Python classes. Then I'm going to have Python control structures.py. Then hit enter. Please enter a score. If I enter 49, I'm going to get failed. Now let me run it again. Enter a score. I enter 51, passed. So let's try it one more time. And here I'm going to run the program, enter a score. I'll enter 77 and hit enter. It is going to give me passed.